Knowledge, as it turned out, made for excellent currency when properly hoarded. The Technological Preservation Guild had discovered this truth approximately 4 centuries ago and had been exploiting it ever since, maintaining an iron grip on something most species considered almost religious: the right to understand machines. Not just operate them, mind you, but actually comprehend what made the blinking lights blink and the spinning parts spin. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. For the past 4 centuries, this arrangement had worked splendidly, assuming your definition of splendid included paying exorbitant fees every time your food synthesizer developed a minor glitch. The guild members wore ceremonial robes embedded with circuit patterns, spoke in hushed tones about the sacred flow of electrons, and generally treated a loose wire with the same gravity most civilizations reserved for funerary rites. The Velkans had adapted to this system better than most, which said more about their natural disposition than their technological aptitude. As a species, they resembled what might happen if someone tried to cross a fox with a fennec, gave up halfway through, added some bioluminescent markings for flavor, and called it a Tuesday. Their large pointed ears swiveled independently, their russet fur caught light in peculiar ways, and their society valued caution above nearly everything else. Cautious in hunting, cautious in building, and especially cautious around anything that might explode, electrocute, or otherwise rearrange their molecular structure, which made the current situation in Salvage Yard 7 all the more unusual. 3 Velkan juveniles crouched around a piece of technology that had clearly seen better days, possibly better decades. The maintenance drone lay in a sad heap among discarded hull plating and obsolete power cores, one of its articulated arms bent at an angle that violated several principles of engineering and possibly good taste. Scorch marks decorated its chassis in abstract patterns, and a crack ran through its optical sensor like a canyon through desert rock. Someone had clearly dropped it from a significant height, or possibly thrown it, or perhaps it had simply given up on existence and hurled itself at the nearest hard surface. The largest of the cubs, whose amber eyes suggested either deep concentration or mild panic, reached out with one tentative paw. His companion, slightly smaller with distinctive white markings around her muzzle, made a sound that roughly translated to, "Are you completely insane, or just partially?" The third cub, quieter than his siblings but no less curious, merely tilted his head and watched. They had stumbled upon the drone purely by accident, while exploring areas of the yard their parents had specifically, emphatically, and repeatedly told them to avoid, which naturally made those areas infinitely more interesting. The drone had been buried under a pile of corroded beam supports, barely visible except for the way its metal surface caught the afternoon light of Velkan Prime's orange sun. The largest cub extended a diagnostic probe, a ceremonial tool given to all young Velkans when they reached their 7th season. The probe hummed softly as it approached the drone's surface, designed to assess damage without actually touching the sacred technology. His whiskers twitched with concentration. "The resonance patterns are completely fractured," he announced, trying to sound authoritative and mostly succeeding. "The energy signature is practically non-existent. This drone has transcended to the broken realm." "Obviously," the female cub replied, her tone suggesting she had mastered sarcasm well before mastering patience. "Even a hatchling could determine that. The question is whether the spirit of the machine can be called back." The quiet cub said nothing but produced a small leather pouch containing various ceremonial items: blessed conducting paste, sanctified cleaning cloths, and a tiny hammer used for respectful tapping during ritual diagnostics. He arranged them in a careful semicircle around the drone, his movements precise and reverent. According to everything they had been taught, technology was mysterious, incomprehensible, and prone to malevolent behavior if disrespected. The guildmasters who occasionally visited their settlement spoke of machines as if they were temperamental deities requiring constant appeasement. A drone like this, a maintenance model capable of performing complex repairs on orbital stations, was particularly sacred. Even in its broken state, it demanded reverence. The Cubs had exactly zero idea how to fix it. They knew rituals, diagnostic prayers, and the proper way to apologize to a malfunctioning device. What they didn't know was anything practical about circuits, power distribution, or why the drone's arm was bent like that in the first place. The largest Cub was preparing to begin the chant of mechanical awakening, a 17-minute ceremony that had never successfully repaired anything but made participants feel like they had tried, when the sound of boots crunching on metal debris interrupted his concentration. All three Cubs froze, ears swiveling toward the sound. Their first instinct was to run, naturally, because getting caught near forbidden technology would result in exactly the kind of parental lecture that lasted for hours and included phrases like deeply disappointed and expected better. But curiosity, that dangerous quality that had gotten more species into more trouble than any other single trait in galactic history, kept them rooted to the spot. The figure that rounded the corner of a debris pile stood on two legs, which immediately marked it as unusual. Most species in this sector had at least 4 limbs dedicated to locomotion. This being wore practical clothing devoid of any ceremonial significance. Sturdy pants with numerous pockets, a jacket that had seen considerable use, and boots that prioritized function over aesthetics. Tools hung from a belt in casual disarray, treating expensive diagnostic equipment with the same regard most beings reserved for lunch containers. The human stopped, noticed the Cubs, glanced at the drone, and raised one eyebrow in an expression that somehow conveyed amusement, recognition, and mild confusion simultaneously. Humans had been spacefaring for only 3 generations, a laughably short time by galactic standards. Yet they had already developed a reputation for approaching problems with what could charitably be called creative solutions, and less charitably described as borderline insanity. "Well," the human said in passable Velkin standard, the translator implant in their jaw handling the grammar with acceptable competence, "that looks properly dead." The Cubs stared. The casual dismissal of the drone's spiritual state, the complete absence of reverence, the way this strange being just stood there looking at sacred technology like it was a broken appliance, all of it violated every principle they had been taught. The human walked closer, completely unbothered by the Cubs' obvious alarm. They crouched down next to the drone, picked it up with bare hands, and turned it over with the kind of casual disregard usually reserved for examining produce at a market. The drone was easily the size of a small transport case, but the human handled it like it weighed nothing concerning. "Yep," the human announced after a moment of examination that included absolutely 0 ceremonial protocols. "Someone really did a number on this poor thing. Looks like it took a direct hit from something energetic and angry." They peered closer at the optical sensor, and then maybe fell off a building, or got thrown out an airlock. Hard to say. The largest Cub found his voice, though it came out slightly higher pitched than intended. "That is a Class 7 maintenance drone. It requires guild sanctification before examination. The proper protocols must be observed, or the machine spirit will reject all attempts at communion." The human looked up at him, still holding the drone in a manner that would have horrified any guild master. "Machine spirit? Kid, this thing runs on batteries and algorithms. Pretty sophisticated ones, sure, but nothing spiritual about it." They set the drone down and wiped their hands on their pants, treating residual oil like ordinary dirt. Also, those guild protocols? Mostly theatrical nonsense designed to make simple fixes seem complicated. Good business model, terrible pedagogy. The female Cub's ears flattened against her skull, a sign of severe cognitive dissonance. Everything this strange being said contradicted foundational truths. Yet the confidence in their voice, the easy way they handled technology that should have been untouchable, it raised uncomfortable questions. The quiet Cub finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You touched it with your bare hands, without." Consecration or protective fields. Well, yeah, the human replied, as if this was the most obvious thing in the universe. How else am I supposed to figure out what's wrong with it? You can't diagnose mechanical problems through mysticism and good intentions. They pulled a small tool from their belt, something that looked like a cross between a probe and a screwdriver. Want to see what's actually broken? 3 pairs of Velkan eyes widened simultaneously. The offer hung in the air like forbidden fruit, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Their entire civilization had been taught that understanding technology at this level was beyond them, reserved for guild masters who had spent decades in study. Yet here was this human, casually offering to peel back the curtain. The human seemed to take their silence as consent. They pressed something on the drone's underside, and a panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the internal components. Circuit boards, wiring harnesses, power conduits, and a dozen other elements lay exposed. The cubs leaned closer despite themselves, curiosity overwhelming caution. See this? The human pointed to a blackened component. That's your primary motivator control. Got fried by whatever hit this drone. And this, they indicated a loose cluster of wires, is why it couldn't maintain balance after the hit. Basic connection failure. Nothing mysterious, nothing spiritual, just physics and poor shock absorption. The largest cub's worldview was cracking like thin ice under weight. But the guild says that internal mechanisms are beyond comprehension, that only those with gift of understanding can perceive the true nature of machines. The human laughed, not unkindly. The only gift required is patience and a willingness to learn. Technology isn't magic. It's just applied science, and anyone can learn science. They looked at the 3 young Velkans with something approaching sympathy. Your guild has been gatekeeping basic competence and charging you for the privilege. Impressive racket, honestly. Ethically questionable, but impressive. The quiet cub reached out tentatively, his paw hovering over the exposed circuitry. Could you teach us how it works? The human tilted their head, considering. They had come to this salvage yard for entirely mundane reasons, something about sourcing replacement parts for a water recycling system. Nothing exciting, nothing heroic, just routine maintenance. But the way these cubs looked at that broken drone, like it was simultaneously fascinating and forbidden, that struck something in the human psyche that valued knowledge sharing above arbitrary restrictions. Sure, the human said simply. Why not? I've got time. And with that casual agreement, delivered with all the ceremony of accepting a lunch invitation, the human engineer accidentally set in motion what historians would later call the Velkan Technical Reformation. But that was future history. In the present moment, there were just 3 curious cubs, 1 broken drone, and a human who treated complex technology with the same practical approach most species reserved for changing their footwear. The human's offer hung in the air like an undetonated explosive, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. Teaching cubs to repair technology without guild authorization was technically illegal in 47 different jurisdictions, though enforcing those laws on a human who clearly didn't care about jurisdictional boundaries was another matter entirely. First rule of fixing anything, the human began, settling cross-legged on the ground with the drone between them, is understanding that machines don't have feelings. They're not going to be offended if you poke them wrong. Worst case, you break something that's already broken. The largest cub's tail twitched nervously. But the guild teaches that improper handling causes cascade failures, that machines must be approached with proper respect and they charge you 300 credits when your food processor stops working because a wire came loose? The human interrupted, pulling out what looked like a simple multimeter. Yeah, respect is one word for it. Extortion is another. They pressed the probe against a contact point. See this reading? 0 voltage. That means no power is getting to this circuit, not because the machine is angry, but because something in the power chain is broken. The female cub leaned closer, her earlier skepticism wrestling with genuine curiosity. How do you know where to look? Logic and experience, the human replied, tracing a wire with one finger. Power flows from source to destination. If the destination isn't getting power, you follow the path backward until you find the break. It's like tracking prey, except the prey is invisible and doesn't run away. The quiet cub produced a small notebook from his pouch, something the others hadn't known he carried. He began sketching the drone's internal layout, his paw moving quickly across the page. Smart, the human noted approvingly. Documentation is half of good repair work. Can't fix what you don't understand, can't understand what you don't document. They pulled a small knife from their belt, and all three cubs flinched. Relax. I'm just stripping wire insulation. Watch. With practiced efficiency, the human cut away damaged sections of wiring, exposing fresh copper beneath. Their movements were casual, treating the supposedly sacred components like ordinary materials. No chanting, no ceremonial preparation, just straightforward mechanical work. The guild says that cutting into circuits requires 7 years of meditation training, the largest cub whispered, watching the human work. The guild says a lot of things that make their jobs sound harder than they are, the human countered, twisting 2 wire ends together. Truth is, most repairs are simple. Time-consuming sometimes, sure, but not complicated. They've just convinced everyone that simple equals impossible. They looked up at the 3 young Velkans. "Wanna try?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Wanna try?" 3 simple words that represented either an educational opportunity or the beginning of what their parents would call that incident we don't discuss at gatherings. The largest cub extended his paw first, trembling slightly. The human placed a wire stripper in his grasp, adjusting his grip with patient corrections. "Hold it like this, firm but not crushing. The tool does the work, you just guide it." "What if I damage something?" the cub asked, his voice carrying the weight of generations of technological anxiety. "Then we'll know one more way not to fix a drone," the human replied with alarming cheerfulness. "Besides, look at this thing. You'd have to try pretty hard to make it worse." They guided the cub's paw through the motion. "Squeeze gently, pull straight back. There you go." The insulation peeled away cleanly, revealing bright copper wire beneath. The cub stared at his handiwork with the expression of someone who had just discovered fire for the first time. "I did that. I actually did that." "Congratulations, you've mastered a skill most 5-year-old humans learn," the human said dryly. "Next up, soldering. That's where things get spicy." The female cub had been watching intently, her earlier resistance crumbling under the weight of practical demonstration. "What's soldering?" "Permanent wire connection using melted metal." The human produced a small torch from their seemingly bottomless collection of tools. "Much stronger than twisting wires together, also much hotter, so pay attention." They demonstrated on a test piece, the solder flowing smoothly across the joint. "See? You heat the connection, not the solder. Let the metal's heat melt it. Otherwise you get what we call a cold joint, which is about as useful as a screen door on a spaceship." The quiet cub had been taking notes the entire time, his documentation growing increasingly detailed. He looked up from his notebook. The guild never explains methodology. They just perform the rituals and declare the machine healed or beyond saving. Because if they explain methodology, you wouldn't need them anymore, the human stated flatly. "That's the whole racket. Keep the knowledge secret, maintain the monopoly, charge whatever you want." They handed the torch to the female cub. "Your turn. Don't burn yourself, don't burn me, don't burn your siblings. Everything else is negotiable." What followed was an education in practical engineering that would have given guild masters collective heart failure. The human walked the cubs through component testing, power flow verification, and the subtle art of percussive maintenance, which they demonstrated by tapping the drone's chassis with calculated force. "You just hit it," the largest cub observed with dawning horror and fascination. "Sure did. Sometimes. Connections need encouragement. It's called percussive maintenance, and it saved more equipment than fancy diagnostics ever will." The human grinned. "Don't tell the guild, though. Pretty sure they'd classify it as heresy. The female cub successfully soldered her first joint, albeit with slightly too much material and minor singing of her whiskers. "This is forbidden knowledge," she said, though her tone suggested she was reconsidering whether that was necessarily a bad thing. "This is basic competence," the human corrected. "The only thing forbidden about it is that someone profits from you not knowing it." They examined the joint critically. "Not bad for a first attempt. Little heavy on the solder, but it'll hold. Try another one." Hours passed in the salvage yard, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. The quiet cub discovered an aptitude for detailed work, his steady paws perfect for delicate connections. The largest cub developed a feel for diagnostic logic, tracking problems through systematic elimination. The female cub embraced the practical hands-on approach with enthusiasm that occasionally bordered on reckless. The human supervised with a mixture of patience and sardonic commentary, correcting mistakes and explaining principles in language stripped of mysticism. Power distribution became understandable. Circuit logic revealed itself as elegant rather than arcane. The drone, piece by piece, began resembling something that might actually function again. "Final step," the human announced, holding up a replacement optical sensor they had scavenged from their parts bag. "Installing new components. This is what the guild would charge you half a year's salary for. Watch closely." The optical sensor clicked into place with a satisfying mechanical certainty that suggested the universe occasionally approved of people doing things correctly. The human stepped back, allowing the cubs to admire their collective handiwork. The drone no longer looked like it had been thrown from orbit by an angry deity. "Moment of truth," the human announced, producing a power cell from yet another pocket. "If we did everything right, this thing boots up. If we didn't, we get to learn troubleshooting skills." They connected the power cell to the main input. "Ready?" 3 cubs held their breath. The human pressed the activation stud. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the drone's status lights flickered weakly, grew stronger, and stabilized into a steady green pattern. The optical sensor rotated experimentally, focusing on each cub in turn. The articulated arms unfolded with smooth precision, no longer bent at impossible angles. A soft hum emanated from the motivator assembly as the drone lifted itself upright, balancing on its base with the poise of something that had never been broken at all. The quiet cub's notebook slipped from his paw. The female cub made a sound that roughly translated to shocked disbelief. The largest cub simply stared, his entire worldview rearranging itself in real time. "Well, look at that," the human said with satisfaction. "Turns out you 3 are pretty decent technicians." "Who knew?" "We fixed it," the largest cub whispered. "We actually fixed it. Without ceremonies, without guild authorization, without paying someone else to do something you're perfectly capable of doing yourselves," the human finished. "Funny how that works." The celebration lasted approximately 90 seconds before reality reasserted itself in the form of an approaching figure wearing robes that practically screamed official authority. The guild representative moved through the salvage yard with the purposeful stride of someone who had detected unauthorized competence and intended to stamp it out immediately. "What is happening here?" the representative demanded, gesturing at the functioning drone. "That unit was marked for guild reclamation and ritual disposal. Who authorized its restoration?" The human looked up with polite incomprehension. "Authorized? It was broken, so we fixed it. Pretty standard procedure where I come from." "Standard?" The representative's fur bristled with indignation. "Repair of Class 7 maintenance drones requires guild certification, proper consecration, and submission of forms in triplicate. This is flagrant violation of preservation protocols." "This is a loose wire and a blown component," the human countered, completely unbothered. "Took maybe 3 hours to fix. Most of that teaching these kids basic competence. Your protocols are designed to make simple problems seem complicated so you can charge more." The representative's ears flattened. "The guild maintains technological standards across 17 systems. Without proper oversight, civilians attempting repairs could cause catastrophic failures. Or they might realize that most repairs don't require expensive specialists. The human interrupted. Look, I get it. Nice business model you've got. Create artificial scarcity of knowledge. Charge premium rates for basic service. Economically brilliant. Ethically bankrupt, but brilliant. The three cubs watched this exchange with fascination, having never witnessed anyone casually dismiss guild authority like it was a minor inconvenience. These juveniles performed unsanctioned technical work, the representative stated. There will be penalties, educational corrections. These juveniles learned practical skills that your organization deliberately keeps from them, the human shot back. They demonstrated aptitude, patience, and problem-solving ability. You want to punish that? Go ahead, but I'm guessing their parents might have questions about why the guild wants to keep their children deliberately ignorant. The largest cub found his voice, stronger now than before. We fixed it ourselves. We understood how it worked. The human taught us that technology is logical, not mystical. That knowledge isn't forbidden, it's just restricted. The quiet cub held up his documentation as evidence, pages covered in detailed diagrams and careful notes. The kind of technical manual the guild would have charged substantial fees to access. The representative looked between the functioning drone, the confident cubs, and the utterly unimpressed human. Whatever speech they had prepared about regulatory violations seemed to lose momentum in the face of practical results. This matter isn't concluded, the representative finally managed, retreating into bureaucratic ambiguity. The guild will be reviewing this incident. You do that, the human replied cheerfully. Meanwhile, these kids know how to fix things now. That particular genie isn't going back in the bottle. The representative departed with as much dignity as they could salvage, which wasn't considerable. The moment they were out of earshot, the female cub let out a breath she'd been holding. We're going to be in so much trouble. Probably, the human agreed. But you'll be in trouble knowing how to repair a maintenance drone. That's worth something. They stood, brushing metal dust from their pants. Besides, worst case, your parents ground you. Best case, you've started a minor revolution in accessible technical education. The largest cub looked at the functioning drone, then at the human. Will you teach us more? The human considered this, clearly not having planned to become an educational revolutionary when they woke up that morning. Tell you what, I'm usually at this salvage yard twice a week sourcing parts. If you happen to be here, and if you happen to have broken technology, I might happen to show you how things work. Purely coincidentally, of course. The quiet cub carefully tore several pages from his notebook and handed them to the human. Documentation, in case you forget the procedures. The human examined the detailed notes, genuinely impressed. Kid, these are better than half the technical manuals I've seen. You've got talent for this. They folded the pages and tucked them into a pocket. Keep documenting. Share what you learn. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. With that philosophical observation delivered with all the ceremony of a weather report, the human collected their tools and wandered off toward the section of the yard that actually contained the parts they'd originally come for. Just another routine day, another mundane task, another casual dismissal of institutional authority and artificial barriers to learning. The three cubs watched them go, then looked at each other, then at the drone still hovering peacefully at their feet. They had started the day believing technology was incomprehensible mystery. They ended it knowing that mystery was just ignorance with good marketing. The quiet cub reopened his notebook to a fresh page. We should practice, learn more, maybe teach others. The guild won't like that, the largest cub observed, though his tone suggested this was rapidly becoming a feature rather than a concern. The guild can cope, the female cub replied, her whiskers still slightly singed from soldering practice, but her confidence fully intact. We've got drones to fix. And somewhere in the administrative offices of the Technological Preservation Guild, someone's monitoring system flagged an unusual pattern. Knowledge spreading without authorization, competence developing without proper gatekeeping, and 3 young Velkans who had learned the most dangerous lesson possible. That they were capable of understanding things they'd been told were beyond them. The guild would form committees, draft responses, and attempt to contain what had been started in Salvage Yard 7. But bureaucracy moves slowly, while curiosity moves at the speed of thought. By the time official responses were formulated, the Quiet Cub's documentation had been copied 17 times. By the time penalties were proposed, 12 other Cubs had successfully repaired previously irreparable devices, all because a human had treated a broken drone like a broken toaster, and 3 Cubs had been paying attention. Knowledge, as it turned out, made terrible currency once people realized it could be shared freely. The Technological Preservation Guild would learn this lesson the hard way, though probably not quickly enough to stop the cascade of competence spreading through Velkan society. But that was future history. In the present moment, there was a functioning drone, 3 proud Cubs, and a human engineer who had already moved on to arguing with a salvage dealer about the fair market price of corroded power couplings. Completely unaware they'd accidentally sparked a cultural paradigm shift, and, honestly, probably wouldn't have changed their behavior if they had known. Humans, after all, had their own peculiar relationship with authority, gatekeeping, and people who claimed that simple things were complicated. A relationship that mostly involved ignoring them and doing the work anyway.